Alright, hello. It's me, Shayna, the person that owns this channel. I don't even know if I own it. Like, what does that really mean? Anyways, so we are going back, taking it back to the OG content, okay? We're doing some autism content. And today I wanted to talk about autism in childhood, particularly my, personal hints or whatever it might be that I think that would have been a pretty big red flag for autism. But of course I was missed. As most of you guys know, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 21. I'm 23 now. I was the one that figured it out. I was the one that kind of started the ball rolling and had to convince everybody, had to do all the work and stuff. As many of you probably know, females are often missed on the spectrum and they don't get diagnosed until older. So I thought it would be important to kind of share not just ways to spot autism in a child in general, but also specifically females. This isn't going to be like every single possible thing in a list and it's going to be this perfect educational video. These are just some things that I jotted down, and some of them are much more universal and some of them are much more specific. Nobody with autism is going to be the same child, show the same signs. A lot of it is about quirks, and everybody's quirks are different, so I think that's also a big reason as to why they're easily missed. Especially as a child, I was just kind of like written off as like, I'm just a weird gal, which I totally am, but they wrote off some things that were a lot more serious than me just being like a little odd of a person, Also, I do astrology stuff, as you guys know. I've got a lot of links down below. I have a Depop shop, which I'm selling stuff on. I sell my own readings now through my Instagram/my PayPal. I'll put all the information down below. I have an astrology channel with my best friend Nina, and my Instagram link will be down below. All of the links ever. It's overwhelming, and I think I might be starting a Twitch. So if I have a Twitch by the time that this video comes out, that'll be linked down below. So that's super exciting. That's super fun. Fill up your quarantine time with me and my roommate. Okay. Anyways, I think that the number one biggest kind of indication of the possibility of autism is speech. And for me personally, I didn't start speaking until I was a little bit older. I mean, not as old as a lot of people on the spectrum, but older in comparison to somebody that is neurotypical. I didn't start speaking until I was like late in my 3rd year of life. What? Later in I was 3 years old, later in that 3-year-old year. Why can't I figure out how to say that? I was 3 when I started talking, and then I actually stopped talking when I was 4, which that's another common thing with autism, is that people might start talking at a young age, but then stop, and it'll kind of feel like, they're making all this progress, and then all of a sudden it's all halted. And I also had a speech impediment. Again, just because you have a speech impediment doesn't mean you have autism. These things aren't hand in hand. These are just some things to look out for. That should have been a major red flag that, I had trouble speaking when I was younger. I stopped, and then when I did develop speech, I had a major speech impediment. A lot of my speech impediments dissolved by the time I made it to about 1st grade, but I couldn't say my R's up from age 0 until I was in 6th grade, until I was 13. I couldn't say my R's. I would say them like L's, and so I went to speech all the time. And also I think a big indication of autism is that I went to speech all the time, and then I also went to GATE, which is like gifted and talented education. So that kind of speech trouble plus just a smart kid naturally, I don't know, also should have been something where it's like, oh, we should get this girl checked for something, or I don't know. Whatever. Also, from the second I started learning all the way through elementary school, I didn't like talking. My parents had a lot of trouble getting me to talk. I wanted to point to everything and use like nonverbal sounds, nonverbal cues. My parents literally had to just refuse. My parents didn't baby me, so I think that if I was babied, my autism would have showed a lot more, and I probably would have spoken a lot less, developed my speech a lot less. But because my parents were so insistent that like, she's not gonna get what she wants unless she speaks. We're not going to talk to her unless she speaks. If she just points, we're not going to acknowledge her. And because they did that, they wound up, forcing me to speak. For a lot of reasons is a very good thing, and I'm really thankful for that, honestly. But at the time, I absolutely hated it, and I knew that they knew what I was saying. I knew that when I pointed that way, they knew what I wanted. There was even times when I would pretend I was sick, which I was sick a lot, which that's also a big indication of autism, is if your kid's just sick a lot. None of this stuff alone is gonna mean fucking anything, right? But you have to think autism is a combination of traits, okay? I have a super sensitive stomach, have had my whole life. I have asthma, I have a very weakened immune system. And so a lot of times I would lie to my mom and I would say that I was sick, and I would say I had a sore throat, or I lost my voice so I didn't have to talk, and I would go on the full day, you know, without talking. And then I remember one day I felt so guilty about it. I told my teacher that I actually could, and I felt so bad, and she told my mom, but my mom didn't think anything of it. I don't know. That's just the end of this video. I don't know. Eating is another big thing. Being a super duper picky eater. I was so picky. I was also such a weirdo. I didn't like frosting or like whipped cream, or like I didn't like that texture of Jello. I still don't. I still absolutely hate it. I don't know why I say didn't. I was absolutely repulsed by it, and I still am. And I was just a weird kid that didn't like Twinkies or like a lot of sweets. Like my favorite food was broccoli and like potato and like vegetables, and I didn't like anything like crunchy and tasteless either. I'd call it, ew, crunchy tasteless, like lettuce or cabbage or something like that. And that's another thing, is like all kids are picky eaters, but if the kids' picky eating is kind of categorized by like textures, I think that could have more to do with autism, because why I liked things was because of texture, or why I didn't like them too. Also, I didn't like meat very much, and I didn't eat very much in general. And when I say picky eater, I mean I only ate a few things, and if it was like at all arranged differently, I didn't like it. I wouldn't want to eat from somebody else's home because I didn't know how they cooked their food, and they might have used different ingredients in there that like I didn't like. Like I didn't like butter, I only liked Earth Balance. And I know somebody else with autism, and they are the same way, but even more extreme. Like they just, up until like almost 18, if still probably now, they like won't eat at anybody else's house unless the food is like cooked by his mom. Sensory stuff is obviously huge, and everybody will have their own stuff, like sensory stuff, and especially as a kid. And my biggest thing was the noise of the public toilets automatically flushing. I was terrified by like that sudden loud noise that like all throughout my childhood I had to have like my mom come in and like put her hand on the sensor, because I was so small the sensor wouldn't see that I was there, and it would flush, and it would scare me and like cause me to basically go into a complete meltdown. And that's another huge thing, is just like the reason I was so scared was because of the sudden loud noise. It frightened me. And I think everybody with autism kind of has their own little, you know, I guess funny little thing of like the noise or the sensory thing that really irritated them. Also, the way that I played, I think, was very showing. I would play by like organizing. I really liked to set up things in rows. I was really obsessed with brats, and I would also like want to collect things in kind of like categorically, and I would take really note of like what was the next bracket stall I wanted and if it fit in, and then I would kind of like spend a lot of time just like dressing them all in the perfect thing, giving them all a name, and then just like setting up their town. And like play would be like 2 seconds, but it was all about like the organization, the setting up of it, the imagination of creating these characters. I would also always put away my toys. Most people with autism are honestly not very clean or hygienic, and I definitely had my own hygiene stuff, but I've always been very organized. I haven't always been clean. I'm not very clean, but I'm very organized. And that's another thing, is that with autism you go by rules so much, and a rule was, you know, put away your toys, clean your room. And I was very, I guess, obedient to my parents would be the word. I've always really liked my parents and had a lot of respect for them even as a young kid, and I thought their rules made sense to me, so I always followed them pretty much, except, I mean, when you're older things are different, but especially as a young kid. And so I was never needing to be told to clean my room, to put back my toys. I always liked putting things back, and I always have had a mind where it's like if things aren't put back in the right place, my mind can't operate, which I think is a very autistic thing. Obviously, there were a lot of troubles with friends. I was very aggressive towards my friends personally. I didn't understand how to treat people, and I didn't understand that like I could hurt people, I guess. As you know, with autism, you just don't really understand that what you're doing is hurting somebody until they physically show you, like by crying or by being told. So I would hurt my friends a lot. I'd be very aggressive. I'd get very frustrated, and I didn't know how to use my words to get upset. So I would just kind of like lash out with a lot of energy. And just in general in school, I was just a very aggressive girl, and I didn't really understand gender roles, and I didn't care for them. So I would want to play with the boys all the time, and I didn't understand that that was like, we don't want to play with this girl. I didn't understand that that's why they didn't want to play with me. So I would try to like roughhouse with them and play with them, and it just was not well accepted. So I wound up kind of being like a big bully in a way, and just being just in general very aggressive and getting sent to the principal's office a lot for aggression. And I think that that has a lot to do with autism in a way, because our meltdowns are kind of like a lot of times very aggressive. And so before I knew how to not do that towards people, and it took me a long time to understand to not hurt people. So now I think that's why during meltdowns I hurt myself, because I used to hurt people, and then I, as I grew up, I started being told that, hurting your friends hurts, you don't want to do that, that's mean. So then you kind of internalize that, and now that's turned into hurting myself. So that's kind of why I think it's an autism thing, because it's a thing that comes out during meltdowns, and it's a thing that would come out as a child when I was very, very upset and had all these emotions, but I didn't know what to do with them. So it's just this big physical outburst. I was also just not a self-conscious kid. I didn't understand wanting to fit in. I didn't understand social rules, and I still don't. And I didn't understand why people didn't have such a logical brain as me. And you can just tell that I was much more of a loner, in the sense that I was fine with doing things alone. Like, I had a lot of friends and I was around my friends a lot, but there were just little things that it's like I could be alone a lot more than other children. And I think that's a big indicator, that introversion, where you can just completely entertain yourself and you're really fine, and you're not looking around, you're not interested in what your friends are doing unless you're there, and you're not concerned with what everybody else is doing, because you're just so hyper focused and hyper concerned with what you're doing and what you're interested in, and other people just seem a lot more boring. And I think that's a big indication of autism. I think back to elementary school and during recess a lot, how I'm surprised that nobody thought it was odd how much I could isolate myself, and how much I was fine either isolating or being with friends. Also, because I wasn't very good with people, I really clung on with people and friends and kids. I really clung on to my stuffed animals, and I was very obsessed with them and very protective of them, and very much like lived my own world through them. These things separate don't mean anything, but together I think they show a lot, and I think that just shows another level of introversion, where I was absolutely satisfied just playing with my stuffed animals, and if friends were around, that's cool, and I'd play with them. But I didn't need that as much as most kids did, and I was so fine playing by myself. And especially because I was an only child, it was like I entertained myself most of the time, and I never wanted a kid to entertain myself with me, and like sometimes my parents would play with me and stuff. But I think just that level of introversion is a big indicator of autism, especially when you're a kid. With females, we mask it a lot. Like, I definitely did try to fit in, I did try to talk to friends, and I have always been somebody who's wanted to make close relationships with people and been very interested in people, but I was never interested in the masses. I was never interested in the drama. I was never really interested in their lives, and like how neurotypical people really get invested, if that makes sense. Again, a lot of this is easy to hide. I probably did seem very extroverted from the outside, because I always did have a lot of friends. I always was around people, but there's something about me that the way that I moved and navigated myself was very isolated. Also, I think it was weird because I am a female. I'm so female presenting. I was able to mask so well, especially as a young kid. I was a very good student. I definitely had a big fear, because I was told by my parents to get good grades. I had a big fear of not getting good grades, and I definitely had a big pressure on me to get good grades. And also, I understood how to work this system so well, and I was so good at memorizing things that I knew it was very easy for me to get good grades. And so with that combination of looking like such a feminine girl and getting such good grades and following the rules so much of the time, when I would break the rules because they didn't make sense to me, or when I would do things because I wanted to, it was very off kilter. So I feel like I definitely, if I looked different growing up, I would get in a lot more trouble, because I got in a lot of trouble for being, like I said, aggressive, for kind of just not following rules, for not understanding people's boundaries. I think that's the bottom line, not understanding people's boundaries and not putting a person behind a person, because when you're autistic, you only understand your perspective, and that's something that took me so long to understand. And so because of that, that caused a lot of issues, and I got in trouble a lot. But because I was such a good student, it was looked over, because I didn't seem like a troubled kid, because I was getting A's and B's, and I was doing my homework, when in reality I was doing that stuff because of my autism. I was doing that stuff because it's a rule, and I can't break a rule, because if I break a rule, that's like my world's gonna deteriorate, and I'm gonna just completely crumble as a person. Like, one time I forgot to finish my homework, and I had a meltdown, and it was the first time I'd ever forgotten to finish my homework, and it was 4th grade, and I just remember trying to hold myself together and not have a meltdown in class, so I could go to the bathroom and have a meltdown there. And again, like, I obviously tried to hide a lot of this stuff, so it makes sense that it wasn't seen, but just that kind of awkward combination of being such a rule-abiding person, but yet breaking the rules all the time due to social things. I was always breaking the social rules, and I think that's a big indicator of autism, because these social rules aren't as written out as the rules of a classroom, raise your hand, got it, check. blah, 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 gotta check, social rules are more come and go. And those are the ones that I kept on breaking. So because of that, I wasn't highlighted or paid attention to as much as I probably should have been. This is just kind of an anecdotal story that I always think back to, that it was a big question in my life as to why I did this. I never understood why I did it, and I always knew that the reason why I did it was the key to whatever was up with me, because I always knew there was something up with me. I just didn't know how to phrase it. I liked elementary school, because this is childhood, I'm just talking about elementary school. I liked it. I was interested. I wasn't somebody that was super anti-school in elementary school. Once I got to middle school, I wasn't super into it, but I just enjoyed learning and enjoyed learning new things, and I had a lot of pretty good elementary school teachers. So I was not a student that wanted to ditch class, that felt any reason to ditch class, especially because it's a rule, right? But during recess sometimes, I would kind of hide in the bathroom sometimes, and then the bell would go off. I purposely waited a really long time after the bell, hiding in the bathroom while everybody was going in after recess. So then when I would come out, everybody was gone, and then the doors are locked. So if the doors are locked, you can't get inside as a kid, right? So if I waited too long, then I would be kind of stuck outside, so it would seem as though I was just left behind. And I would do that a lot, and I would hide in the playground and just sit there and just do nothing and just try to not get found. And I did that a handful of times over the course of a few years, and I never understood why I did it, because one time I missed art class, and I loved art class. I had no reason to want to miss it, so I'd make up excuses all the time to my parents, like I was going to the nurse's office and they left me out, I was going to the bathroom and I didn't hear the bell, so that my parents and my teachers would kind of just look past it or just think that I was ditching. But in reality, it was a desperate need to get away from people, to get a break, to have a moment of silence to myself, because the outer stimuli is too much, all the kids are too much, and I didn't understand that at the time. I couldn't say that at the time, but that's 100% what that was. It's just weird to think back, because I knew what I needed. I knew I was what I need is some alone time. I just didn't understand. As a kid, everybody has these weird little things. I had a big fear of getting my hair cut. I didn't like people touching my hair. I didn't like brushing my hair, but yet I had crazy long hair, so it was this big hassle. And I think that's a very common thing with autism, is hair, and not wanting to get it touched. I hated getting my hair washed. I'd have a tantrum every single time. I wouldn't want to fully immerse myself in the shower, so my mom would have to put me up on the cupboard and put my head in water, and I still absolutely hated it. I would try to only wash my hair once a week. All the way up through high school, I'd only shower every 3 days or something. I was not a fan of it, and I danced all the time, so I was disgusting. And that's what I'm saying, is I was organized, but I wasn't clean. So just in general, if a kid is showing some sort of hesitancy towards hair or not wanting to be touched like that, I think that's a big indication too. Fidgeting. What was called fidgeting? Like I mentioned, I danced. I was a huge fidgeter. I'd get in trouble for fidgeting all the time, and everybody would say, you're not listening because you're fidgeting. And I would think to myself, because I'm fidgeting, I'm paying attention more, and I didn't understand that it was stimming. And I was always known as a big fidgeter. That was my whole MO in dance class. My parents always said that on stage I would fidget over and then I would fidget, and it was fidgeting all the time, but they didn't know what a stim was. But that's in reality what it really was. So if a kid is fidgeting and I was very restless, it's not because they don't care, they're not paying attention, or they're bored. It's because they're trying to pay attention and they're interested. Obviously having tantrums and meltdowns, but that's kind of hard to tell the difference because kids have tantrums, There was definitely a cutting off point where I was too old to have tantrums, but yet I still had them. And that's the indicator of autism, when you go, my kid's a little bit too old to be doing this, right? They probably are, in the sense of not that I'm shaming it at all, obviously, but just that they probably are a little bit too old. So that means that that's probably just a part of them. That's not just them being a child. My parents were just kind of always waiting for me to outgrow it. And even to this day, I haven't outgrown it. That's the difference. Having tantrums because they're young and they're a kid versus having meltdowns because they're autistic and they're always going to have them. This is something that I think from the outside, I don't think anybody would be able to really pinpoint. But a big thing is, and I kind of touched on this earlier, is they did this test, and if there's 3 people and then one person leaves and person 1 shares information with person 2 and then person 3 comes back, does person 3 know this information? The autistic kid would say yes, person 3 does know this information. When you're autistic, you don't understand perception. You think to yourself, oh well, I heard it, so therefore they heard it. And just that concept applied to a bunch of other things is going to be a telltale sign. So I remember hearing that test somewhere, and I think that's a really good test to give a kid. I mean, now I understand no, but definitely as a kid I wouldn't have understood that. Another story that I remember remember is I wanted to finish everything really fast. I wanted to get everything done as soon as possible, and like I was obsessed with finishing things. And so I had really, really bad handwriting. And really bad handwriting is also a sign of autism. I had such illegible handwriting that teachers couldn't read my homework, couldn't grade my stuff, and so my teacher needed some sort of incentive to make me write in a cleaner way. And the incentive that she thought of without even asking me was to say that if I start writing better, then I get to have a lunch with my favorite teacher, who was my second grade teacher. She was like my favorite teacher. I was super into her. We spoke outside of class. Like I just really took a liking to her. And I cleaned my act up so fast. And I think was to get a solo lunch with her so I wouldn't have to go to lunch with everybody else. I would just get to have my own lunch with her and sit and talk with her. And that was like the best incentive you could ever give me, which I think is so telling, you know, because the whole point of it was like, I get a lunch free from everyone. That sounds fantastic. And I get a lunch talking to my favorite teacher, where I get to learn her wisdom, where I get to hear what she has to say. Like, I feel like that's just a very autistic thing, to be interested in somebody older than you and so disinterested in the kids that you're around. You know, instead of that being a punishment like that would be for most kids, it was literally like the best reward you could give me. I remember another instance where I brought my lunch to school every day because, again, I didn't like how school lunch did their food, and I was lucky enough to have a mom that was kind enough to make a lunch for me during elementary school. And also, she didn't really have a choice, I think, in the matter, because she knew that if she didn't make me a lunch, that equaled a meltdown. And it proved very real one day, when the one day that I forgot my lunch, I didn't have one, I had to go buy a lunch. I had a huge meltdown, so bad that I had to be taken home from school. And that happened a lot. I had a lot of meltdowns where I would get taken to the nurse and then I would have to go home. And the nurses knew me. Like, I feel like that's another, yet again, telltale sign of autism. Freaked me out, and it fucked me up for so long, and just that little change affected me. And my parents, again, didn't really understand what the big deal was. Like, why couldn't I have just not eaten? But I was sitting in a different place in the cafeteria now, and I didn't have my food, and my routine was off, and it really made me spiral for whatever reason. And again, that's another story where I think that's not a normal reaction, you know? Those are just some stories or some things that I just collected and put in a video. As you know, I am so tired of talking. I just did a fucking hour-long drag me on my astrology channel, and now I talk forever in these videos. But I wanted to put up some more autism content, and I thought this would be really smart, especially because, again, I'm a female, I was missed, but yet I feel like there were a lot of things screaming at people, but it's just because of the education. Nobody knew what autism looked like in females. That's why I was looked over. And I think it's just so important getting the education out there, and share any of your silly stories, I guess, silly stories about, you know, autism being shown as a kid, or if you're undiagnosed and, you know, something that you thought you were screaming at your parents basically and they didn't hear. Not literally, but you know what I mean. Anyways, if you have any more video requests as well as some autism content to talk about, I'd love that, because I do want to continue making this channel at least sometimes about autism. Again, all my links for everything are down below, and goodbye.